India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived in Moscow for talks with the Russian president. He told Vladimir Putin that India's economy had benefited from its strategic partnership with Russia. But he also talked about the war in Ukraine, saying that peace was, quote, of the utmost importance and that war cannot solve problems. Here's more of what Modi had to say.
Excellency, war, struggle, or terror attacks. Every person who believes in humanity feels the pain when there's a loss of lives. And even there, when innocent children are murdered, one sees them die. The heart pains, and that pain is unbearable. And there was a discussion in this context as well.
We can get more from DW correspondent Emily Sherwin, who joins us now from Riga in Latvia because Russian authorities closed DW's bureau in Moscow. Emily, is it surprising that Modi brought up this loss of life in the war in Ukraine with Putin?
I think Modi's statement shows the awkward position that he is in with his visit to Moscow today, because he's trying to keep both the West on side and also demonstrate his closeness to Russia. I think that statement was kind of purposely vague. He condemned the attack, but without actually blaming Russia or blaming Vladimir Putin. I think overall, though, this visit yesterday and today was marked by both sides really trying to demonstrate how close India and Russia really are and how close Modi and Putin are as well. We saw both sides referring to each other as friends. They hugged twice in the course of this visit for quite a long time. Modi talked about trust in that partnership between Russia and India. And actually, Modi also received today an award for his special services in deepening the bilateral relations between the two countries in a special ceremony. And even yesterday, during talks, unofficial talks at Putin's residence, the two even got the chance to pat Putin's horses. So, you know, a pretty personal visit and nice optics for both sides, which is especially important because economic relations between the two sides have been deepening, especially since the Ukraine war started, with Russia selling a lot of the oil that Western countries have stopped buying since sanctions hit after that war began, after the invasion of Ukraine. India has been buying that oil. So, you know, for Putin, Modi is a very important partner economically as well.
The West, of course, has tried to isolate Russia over the war, yet, as you've been saying, the optics of this kind of meeting is important to Putin. But what about any concrete results? Like, what is actually concretely coming out of these discussions between the Indian and the Russian leaders?
Well, there wasn't actually a press conference held after this meeting, so we didn't get much of a hint of what concrete decisions were actually taken. Before the summit, there was some talk from observers about potentially India trying to get further discounts on oil and perhaps a deepening of nuclear cooperation on nuclear energy, particularly, but we didn't really hear anything. The only thing that we did find out is that Modi will be coming to the BRICS summit in Russia. And last week, Vladimir Putin called that summit part of one of the main pillars of what he sees as a new world order, a multipolar world order where the West is becoming less and less relevant. So again, kind of the optics there of mentioning that BRICS summit and showing the importance of those ties between the two leaders.
Emily, thank you. That's DW's Emily Sherwin reporting from Riga.
While NATO leaders met in Washington, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi made his first state visit to Moscow since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. He came with a hug for President Vladimir Putin. Not once, not twice, but at least 3 times. The leader of the world's largest democracy embracing a man internationally wanted for war crimes. Those hugs are now going viral. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky called them a huge disappointment and a devastating blow to peace efforts. During his talks in Moscow, Modi says he told Vladimir Putin that peace was of, quote, utmost importance. But again, he stopped short of condemning the war in Ukraine. He said that India's economy had benefited from its strategic partnership with Russia. India has stepped up imports of Russian oil despite criticism from Western countries that have put sanctions on Moscow. My next guest is an expert on India and its relations abroad. I'm pleased to welcome to the day Michael Kugelman. He's the director of the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center think tank. He joins us tonight from Washington, D.C. Good to see you. Now, let's set the scene first. How important is Russia for India?
Well, quite important on a very concrete level. There are things that Russia has long provided and continues to provide to India that India believes it cannot get from any other country, and certainly not at the cost point that it gets them from Russia. One of those things is energy, particularly oil. We've seen India increase its oil imports from Russia in recent years, including since the invasion of Ukraine. And the other thing is weapons. There are certain types of weaponry, significant levels of weaponry that India has long relied on for Russia. And these days, one of the main examples is missile defense. This is something that India has continued to look to from Russia. So even as India has been strengthening its relations with so many other countries around the world, as we know, it continues to look to Russia. Russia is also, in India's view, certainly in New Delhi and also within the general public, it has a special kind of there's a special kind of view of Russia, which I think is rooted in nostalgia from Cold War days when the relationship first formed, and that is to look at Russia as essentially India's most trusted and most dependable friend.
And what's in this for Russia? Because Putin has been forging closer ties with China, especially as well since the launch of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Why does he need India?
Well, I mean, Russia doesn't have many friends these days, or I should say that it doesn't have many powerful friends, right? Indeed, it is strengthening its ties with China, particularly since the war in Ukraine began. But otherwise, it doesn't really have many powerful friends not named China. And in that sense, India is important. India is a critical customer. It receives significant levels of energy from Russia, significant levels of arms supplies. And at a moment when Russia's economy is very uncertain, as it's bogged down in Ukraine, it really cannot take any friend for granted, and particularly a long-standing friend and a globally significant friend like India. So India will continue to be a very important country for Russia.
India has maintained neutrality in the war against Ukraine. Now, Modi says he discussed the conflict openly and in detail with Putin. What do you think that conversation looked like?
Well, as I understand it, Modi repeated a message that he has been putting out there ever since Russia invaded Ukraine, and that is that essentially the war needs to end. As I understand it, Modi had said that this is a war that can't be settled on the battlefield, and he essentially pushed for the war to end through diplomacy, dialogue, de-escalation, and so on. Now, that certainly falls short of outright condemning the war, but this is something that India is not willing to do because of its special relationship with Russia. So I think that for India, which certainly does not support the war, and indeed its interests are not served by an ongoing war in Ukraine, India hopes that by continuing to pressure Russia, including Putin, to try to figure out a way to end this war, that eventually that will pay dividends, and eventually we will start to see a de-escalation. But of course, even if a close friend like India is pressuring Russia to try to bring the war to an end, that is not going to, in my view at least, that is not going to prompt Putin to decide, okay, let's end the war now.
Now, India's stance of this public neutrality, you mentioned it earlier, has been dictated mostly by national interests. How has that affected India's ties with the West? They would have liked to see a strong condemnation of the war, I'm assuming.
Right. I mean, the West, including Washington and other NATO countries, have grudgingly accepted India's position, and that is to refrain from condemning the war, but still oppose it. And I think that for India, it's been experiencing a major diplomatic challenge. This is one of the many reasons why it doesn't support Russia's war in Ukraine. It's put India in a very difficult spot where it has indeed sought to appease both the West and Russia by essentially standing on the fence and refusing to condemn the war, but also calling for it to end. It's very difficult for India to maintain this position. For now, so long as we continue to see the stalemate playing out in Ukraine, I think it can continue to do that successfully, in the sense that its ties with both Russia and the West have remained quite robust over the last few years, despite the war. But if we were to see in the coming months or the coming years, if the nature of this war were to change, if it were to intensify, if it were to somehow extend or expand to other countries, well, that would put India in a very difficult spot. It would face significant levels of pressure from the West, and I think that would make its balancing act all the more difficult to pull off. But this is what India's foreign policy on the whole has been for many years, what it describes as strategic autonomy, this idea of maintaining an independent foreign policy where you don't throw yourself in any camp, and where you try to manage relations with countries that don't get along with each other in order to maximize your options and flexibility with your foreign policy.
Has it paid off so far?
Well, I mean, it has, in the sense that today India's relations with Russia are in a very good place. Its relations with the U.S. and the NATO states on the whole are in a very good place. Its relations with the West are in a good place. Its relations with the global South, which generally has good relations with Russia, are in a very good place. And for this reason, some have indicated that perhaps India could be one of the very few countries that might have the capacity to serve in the role of a mediator, to try to get the warring parties, the Russians and the Ukrainians, to wind down this war. India has good relations with Russia. It also has a fairly good relationship with Ukraine, though clearly Ukraine, for good reason, was very upset about Modi's visit to Russia. Because of this situation where India has good relations with with all the belligerents, it might have the capacity to play that role, but only if the belligerents actually want there to be mediation and want India to play that mediating role. And quite frankly, it doesn't seem like anyone is ready. None of the belligerents are ready for this war to wind down. But India does have that special status. Again, that special relationship with Russia, a good relationship with Ukraine. It might have that capacity to play that role of a mediator, but not any time in the immediate future.
Fascinating insights. That was Michael Kugelman, the director of the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center think tank. Thank you so much.
Thank you.